The world is in shock after learning of the shocking news that Pope Francis, the beloved Pope who changed the Vatican's stance on social justice, died on Easter Monday at the age of 88. However, questions remain. Was his death really natural? Or could the Church's scandals have had a covert influence on his final days? Stay tuned, because what we learn next could completely alter your understanding of the Pope's legacy. While Pope Francis was a globally influential figure, known for his progressive stance on issues like poverty, the environment, and LGBTQ rights, the Church was constantly embroiled in scandals and mysteries behind his public persona, some of which may have contributed to his premature departure. For millions of people, his death marks the end of a chapter in the Church's modern history that was full of hope, reform, and of course controversy. In this video, we will examine the circumstances surrounding Pope Francis's death and examine By the end, you'll have a better understanding of the man behind the casket, the difficulties he faced, and the legacy he left behind. However, before we get started, let's look at the years leading up to this fateful moment. Pope Francis was born Jorge Mayo Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and delve into the secrets that might have been hidden behind the walls of the Vatican. We'll also uncover some of the lesser-known facts that have raised eyebrows among insiders and the faithful. When Pope Francis was elected in 2013, he was the first pope from the Americas and the Southern Hemisphere. His ascent to the papacy was anything but typical. As the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he was well known for his modest lifestyle, his preference for public transportation over chauffeured cars, and his profound concern for the poor and marginalized. These qualities immediately won him admiration, both domestically and internationally. From the start, Pope Francis distinguished himself from his predecessors by deciding to change the tone of the Catholic Church, which had frequently been perceived as being out of touch with the modern world. His papacy started off with bold actions. He called for a more inclusive church that would prioritize mercy and compassion over judgment. He also adopted the idea of walking with the people, which resulted in his well-known open-door policy on a number of contentious issues. However, everyone wondered if he could actually reform the Church. His progressive views were groundbreaking in many ways, especially his outspoken support for LGBT+ rights, preservation of the environment, and the role of the Church in combating poverty. He even started discussions with other religions, highlighting the value of interfaith understanding. However, even though he received international praise for these progressive ideas, not everyone supported his reforms. Within the Vatican, there were many rumors of disapproval from conservative groups who believed that his pontificate was threatening the very foundations of the Catholic Church. These internal conflicts became more apparent in the years preceding his. As Pope Francis entered his 80s, many noticed that he started to slow down. His once endless schedule of traveling the world and making public appearances and meetings with world leaders became more limited. At first, this was attributed to the natural effects of aging, but many were unaware that Pope Francis had been quietly managing his affairs. Critics accused him of being too lenient, particularly on sensitive issues like divorce and same-sex unions. In 2014, less than a year after becoming Pope, Francis was hospitalized for an infection that necessitated surgery. Although the Vatican initially downplayed the severity of the situation, some insiders started to worry. However, it wasn't just the occasional surgery that worried people. It was the recurring health issues that started to emerge more frequently in later years. In 2019, Pope Francis was diagnosed with a serious knee problem that greatly affected his mobility. For a while, he walked with a cane, and later, when he appeared in public, he was even seen in a wheelchair. These pictures showed how his health was affecting his ability to carry out his duties, and the public couldn't help but notice that. The Vatican attempted to reassure everyone that these were just signs of aging, but those who knew him well started to worry that the situation was much more serious. However, this is where things become even more mysterious. During the Pope's health declined at an alarming rate in the last months of his life, in order to fulfill his papal duties. And in some cases, he even seemed to push himself beyond what his body could handle. His speeches and public masses during his trips to different countries suggested that he was surviving by sheer willpower. But could there have been more going on behind the scenes? Rumors began to circulate that Pope Francis had been receiving covert treatments, and that some church officials knew the extent of. Pope Francis made headlines for his progressive stance on social issues, but he also found himself at the center of controversies that threatened to destroy the reputation he had built over the years. Beneath his public persona as a pope for the people, a number of scandals began to emerge. Was there a cover-up, Or was the Vatican simply doing what it could to protect the Pope's legacy and keep the faithful from worrying too much? The ongoing sexual abuse crisis within the Catholic Church was one of the most prominent scandals Pope Francis had to deal with while in office. Despite his public acknowledgement of the problem and his vow to address it head-on, there were still numerous accusations that the Vatican wasn't doing enough. Survivors of abuse came forward, some accusing high-ranking church officials of shielding the abusers. Pope Francis tried to enact reforms to hold those responsible accountable, but many failed. Despite Pope Francis's efforts to clean house, the report revealed that powerful figures within the Vatican still sought to protect the Church's reputation rather than seek justice for the victims. The reforms were too little, too late, but the problem went deeper. In 2020, an internal Vatican report was leaked to the press, revealing shocking details about the Church's response to cases of sexual abuse. The leak caused a stir, and many started to wonder whether the Pope's attempts at then became the financial scandals that rocked the very foundation of the Vatican. In recent years, the Vatican had been under intense scrutiny for its financial dealings, especially after allegations surfaced that the Holy See had been involved in dubious investments. The Vatican's finances were notoriously opaque, and rumors about embezzlement and corruption circulated widely. Pope Francis had promised to bring transparency to the Church's finances. Nevertheless, stories about poor management, unethical investments, and financial irregularities kept coming up. One of the most startling revelations occurred in 2021, when it was revealed that the Vatican had lost millions of dollars on a risky real estate investment in London, with some of the money used being linked to donations from the faithful. The story sparked a flurry of criticism, with many people wondering if Pope Francis was actually aware of the tensions within the Vatican increased as a result of the financial mismanagement that took place under his supervision, or if he had been purposefully kept in the dark. Many accused the Vatican bureaucracy of undermining Pope Francis's attempts at change, because his progressive views were at odds with the more conservative elements of the Church, and it seemed that every step forward was met with resistance. As Pope Francis entered the final stretch of his papacy, his health seemed to deteriorate at a faster rate in early 2025, and there were rumors that his condition was much worse than the public had been told. While Vatican officials insisted that the Pope was just dealing with age-related problems, those close to him started to whisper about something more sinister. The fact that Pope Francis had been pushing himself, in spite of his failing health, only made the mystery even more intriguing. In March 2025, weeks before he passed away, he made a number of public appearances, including a major speech in St. Peter's Square. Insiders close to the Vatican say that Pope Francis was heavily medicated during these appearances to control the pain from his ailing knees and to manage the effects of the mysterious illness that had been plaguing him for months. However, was this enough to conceal the true nature of his illness? The Pope looked visibly frail and struggled to speak for extended periods of time, but he delivered what was to be his final message to the world, urging the faithful to continue striving for peace and solidarity. Several high-ranking Vatican officials were reportedly seen meeting privately in a series of papal transitions just days before his death. Could these private discussions have been about more than just the Church's future? Did the Vatican elite realize that Pope Francis was no longer able to carry out his duties? Then came the day the world had been dreading, Easter Monday, and Pope Francis passed away peacefully. According to the Vatican's declaration, the Pope's death was officially attributed to old age complications, but those who knew him well suspected that his rapid decline was not an accident. His death came so close to Easter, a time for reflection and renewal, that it felt almost too well-timed, almost orchestrated. Many people were left wondering if there had been other factors at play. Behind closed doors, rumors started to circulate that Pope Francis's rapid decline might have been accelerated by stress and exhaustion from his relentless. Pope Francis passed away on Easter Monday, leaving the world in mourning, and the Vatican faced the daunting task of choosing a new pope. The public's reaction was one of sorrow, as Catholics around the world prayed for him. This was in response to his efforts to reform the Church and the ongoing scandals that marred his papacy. But others thought that something more sinister could have been involved. Was his death a natural consequence of a lifetime of struggle, or were there darker forces at play that had been quietly working against him for years? His soul, and considered the legacy he left behind. But behind the scenes, the fallout from his death was much more complicated than anyone could have imagined. While many were preoccupied with the election of a new pope, the more pressing question was what had actually happened to Pope Francis in his final months. As the Church grieved his death, several startling revelations emerged that suggested that his final days as pope were not as calm and natural as they seemed. To begin, several former high-ranking. Some have suggested that the Vatican purposefully downplayed the severity of the pope's condition in order to preserve his legacy and prevent a crisis within the church. Could it be that the church leaders, fearing a loss of public trust, kept his true condition hidden because they were so concerned with keeping the Vatican stable that they allowed Pope Francis to continue with his duties? Vatican officials have since come forward to claim that they were aware of the Pope's declining health far earlier than the public was led to believe. In addition to the health cover-up, there have been reports of a power struggle that escalated in the months preceding Pope Francis's death, despite the fact that he was physically and mentally incapable of continuing. Sources within the Vatican asserted that factions within the Church, those who supported, and those who opposed his progressive reforms, had reached a standstill. Some even claimed that the conservative faction within the Vatican had started plotting against the Pope in an attempt to install someone who would rescind many of the reforms that Pope Francis had started. One particularly disturbing allegation is that some Vatican insiders may have purposefully postponed any medical care or proactive measures to improve the Pope's health because they were more concerned with maintaining their own power dynamics within the Church. Was Pope Francis just too much of a liability for these people who were afraid that his progressive agenda would threaten their authority? As the Vatican gets ready for the conclave to choose a new pope, many Catholics are wondering what will happen to the Church and whether it will continue on the reform path that Pope Francis started. Will the new pope continue his legacy of compassion, inclusivity, and social justice? Or will the Church return to its more traditional conservative stance? As we piece together the pieces of the current situation, Pope Francis's sudden and mysterious death raises a number of questions. But one thing becomes clear: his death was much more complicated than the Vatican would have us believe. Although the public has been told that his death was due to natural causes and old age, a closer look paints a much darker picture. We now know that Pope Francis's final months were not only a struggle with illness, but also a confrontation with the very institutions he sought to reform. His health may have suffered as a result of these internal conflicts, but it's impossible to deny the possibility that the question that remains, and one that will probably linger for years to come, is whether Pope Francis's death was truly natural, or if there were external forces at play. The cover-ups and hidden financial scandals were the forces that loomed over his papacy, making his final years far more stressful and tense than most could have imagined. Was there a planned campaign to remove him? Pope Francis's removal from office was intended to silence his progressive reforms and make room for a more traditional pope, who would serve the interests of the Vatican's powerful conservative factions. As the Vatican continues to choose a new pope, we must consider what will happen to the reforms he championed. Will his passing signal the end of the Catholic Church's progressive movement, or the start of a new era in which the Church welcomes change and challenges the status quo? The Catholic Church is at a turning point in its history, and Pope Francis's legacy will probably have a significant impact on how it develops. However, as with any significant organization, the reality of what goes on behind the scenes is frequently far more complicated and unsettling than the public is permitted to see. What do you think? Was Pope Francis's death merely a tragic result of old age, or were there darker forces at work? As we wrap up this investigation into the last days of Pope Francis's life, it's evident that there's much more going on beneath the surface. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel for more shocking stories and in-depth looks into the Vatican's hidden world. Don't forget to like this video and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with our latest content. As we come to an end, Pope Francis's legacy is still complex and multifaceted. His death on Easter Monday sent shockwaves not only through the Catholic Church, but throughout the entire world. Many will remember him for his kindness, progressive values, and efforts to bring about change. But it is impossible to fully know the extent of the power struggles, scandals, and secrets that shaped his papacy. The truth about his last days is far darker than we may ever realize. From the Vatican's cover-ups regarding his health to the power struggles that took place behind closed doors, the mystery surrounding his death leaves us with more questions than answers. In the days ahead, we will probably continue to hear rumors and conspiracy theories. But one thing is certain: Pope Francis's death has revealed a side of the Vatican that many had long suspected powerful forces. What do you think happened to Pope Francis in his final days? Do you think there was more to his death than meets the eye? Let us know in the comments below. The future of the Catholic Church now rests on the line. Will the new pope continue on the path of reform, or will we see a return to the old guard? Only time will tell. However, One thing is certain as we look ahead. The Vatican's darkest secrets may still be hiding in plain sight. Keep yourself informed about our most recent investigations. You won't want to miss what comes next.